Please welcome members of the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C., performing Seasons of Love. Please welcome Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
Good morning and welcome to the Library of Congress on this very special day. It is an honor to welcome Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, along with several members of Congress, including members from the Congressional HIV/AIDS Caucus. And another warm welcome to our partners today from the Names Project Foundation, led by President and CEO Julie Rhoad, the team from the National AIDS Memorial, led by Executive Director John Cunningham, and the founders of the Quilt, Cleve Jones, Mike Smith, and Gert McMullen. Also, thank you to the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C. for that wonderful performance of Seasons of Love from the musical Rent. Please, one more. That song has a strong connection to the Library of Congress. The papers of Jonathan Larson, the writer and composer of Rent, are housed here in the library's music division, and in the collection you will see a sheet of paper with Larson's handwritten notes in long math calculating the 525,600 minutes that you hear in those lyrics. The song, though, Seasons of Love, reminds us of the preciousness of life and living it with love. And that's why we're here today in Washington to remember the tens of thousands of people we love who died from AIDS and the profound impact that they've had on our lives. Tragically, since 1981, close to 636,000 people have died from AIDS in the United States alone. One of them was my first cousin from Chicago. He was a vibrant young man who loved life and enjoyed every minute of meeting people and performing as an actor. We were so proud of him. And he died in the mid-'80s during the early years of the pandemic. Another was a student of mine in library school at the University of Pittsburgh. He was working at the Smithsonian before I recruited him to work at the Chicago Public Library. He was young and handsome and debonair and said, "Carla, Dr. Hayden, don't dress like a librarian." And he created some of the most beautiful exhibitions for the library. And he died, and I spoke at his memorial in 1993. And sadly, there are too many similar stories like these from men and women from San Francisco to New York City, from Seattle to Miami. And for more than 30 years, the AIDS Memorial Quilt has become a beautiful symbol of hope, healing, and remembrance. The patchwork of photographs, clothing, and flowers will forever honor the thousands of lives lost. And each stitch of every fabric sewn represents the heartbreak and social conscience of the impact of the AIDS epidemic on this nation, and serves as a reminder for the rest of us of our responsibility to continue to tell their personal stories. And that's why today we are honored to announce that the National AIDS Memorial will become the new caretaker of the AIDS Memorial Quilt and the Names Project programs. And as part of the transition, the Library of Congress's American Folklife Center will become the new home for the National AIDS Memorial Quilt Archive Collection. This collection of more than 200,000 items includes personal handwritten letters, photographs, biographical records, tributes, epitaphs, news clippings, and even a sewing machine that stitched together a panel of the quilt. These archives will be preserved here at the Library of Congress and made available to the public and researchers for generations to come. But most importantly, it will help humanize and bring to mind the scale of the AIDS pandemic through the words and voices from the people we've lost and the families they've touched. This includes our colleagues here at the Library of Congress who passed away from AIDS and who are remembered on the library panel of the quilt. In the archives we received, a story is told of a small group of library staff members who got together in 1992 to stitch together this panel. They learned how to sew and use a sewing machine during their lunch breaks and staying late after work. And 27 years later, 8 of them still work here at the library and are here this morning. And I invite them to stand or raise your hands. And I know that the people immortalized are here. They're up there. And that is just one of the thousands of stories that are part of these archives. The story of 36-year-old Tom Boscato of Chicago, whose home on Orchid Street was called by friends as, quote, the haven for every lost artistic soul that passed through Chicago. Or the story of 33-year-old actor Marvin Feldman, who was the inspiration for the very first quilt that is on display here today. His family is here and his friends. Please give them a hand. There's a tribute by students of West Iredell Middle School in Statesville, North Carolina, remembering Ryan White, who touched and helped educate the students and the world about the disease. And there's a beautiful letter from the sister of Ernesto Lopez Monillo, Jr. of Huntsville, Alabama, thanking Quilt organizers for helping her heal. And the moving letter from the mother of Ted and Tom Boat, who lost both of her sons to AIDS. And in the letter, she writes, on January 5th, 1992, I was in Florida when his father called me from Ted's bedside. Much later, they told me that when he heard my voice, a tear came from one of his eyes, and within the hour, he was gone. This is just a very small fraction of the stories that need to be told and remembered, and the Library of Congress is proud and honored to serve as the home of the National AIDS Memorial Quilt Archive to preserve its legacy and give the memorial a home. These powerful archives will continue to be a source of healing, comfort, and awareness in memory of those we have lost. As Jonathan Lawson wrote in Rent, it's time now to sing out, though the story never ends. Let's celebrate, remember a year in a life of friends, remember the love, and we promise we will always remember. The Library of Congress panel of the quilt and items from the AIDS Memorial Quilt Archives will be on display here in the Great Hall until World's AIDS Day on December 1st, and we hope you will come back and visit. Now, I'd like to welcome the President and CEO of the Names Project Foundation, Ms. Julie Rhoad.
Thank you, Dr. Hayden. Madam Speaker, Congressman Lewis, Congresswoman Lee, members of the HIV and AIDS Caucus, my colleagues, my friends, and other dignitaries that are here today. I am thrilled to be here with you and tremendously honored to be able to share our stories with you. I'd like to start with a little personal story. It begins in 1982 when I graduated from college and began my career as a professional stage manager in the theatrical arena. And I didn't know at 22 that what I had learned in theater, which was you work together, you rehearse together, you spend your time together doing 8 shows a week, you dine together, you go out after shows, and yes, you have cocktails together, and you become a family in that process. And what happened for me and so many of my friends was that we were faced with an epidemic that was tearing our community apart. And it was a crisis that we didn't know if we were going to survive. Instead of going out for drinks after a show, we were splitting up into care teams. And I remember calling my mother and saying, you know, Mom, I need to tell you what's going on. And first she was concerned for me and concerned that I was going to get sick because it was early. And then she was concerned for my friends. And she said, you know, dear, just the simple act of being human means that somewhere in your life, you're going to be faced with a crisis. You're going to be faced with what you think is the insurmountable, the unsurvivable. And the question is not whether you will get through it, but how you will get through it. And I'm honored to be able to stand in front of this quilt as one of the finest examples of how we began to get through this and work through this. Because, you know, 32 years ago, this quilt was founded by a group of strangers. They gathered to remember the names and the lives of the loved ones that they feared history would forget. And with that seemingly simple act of love and defiance, the first panels of the quilt were made, and the Names Project was founded. That same year, those first memorials traveled here along with 1,900 others, where they made their first appearance on the National Mall. And in doing that, they made it impossible for the world to dismiss or deny AIDS. And they made it impossible for us to look at this without looking at the human toll. In the years since that first display, this quilt has grown to over 50,000 panels, and the names contained in its stitches to over 105,000. This morning, we've come to our nation's capital once again to announce our plans for the future of the AIDS Memorial Quilt and the Names Project. And we are here with some of the most powerful ambassadors and envoys to the cause of human rights that we've ever known. And they are the panels of the AIDS Memorial Quilt. They are our guides. They are our navigators. They are our teachers. They stand ready to remind us all that we are connected one to another. And if we're connected one to another, then indeed we must be responsible one for another. They call on us. Thank you. Embedded in their stitches is a call to us to pinpoint what really matters. They're here for me, they're here for you, and they're here for people from all walks of life all around the globe. As Dr. Hayden stated, and on behalf of the Names Project Board of Directors, our staff, our friends, and our family, I am thrilled to formally announce that in 2020, the National AIDS Memorial will become the caretaker of the AIDS Memorial Quilt and the Names Project programs. The quilt will return to San Francisco, to where it began more than 3 decades ago. And as you know, part of this transition, we linked DC and San Francisco and Atlanta, but we linked DC and San Francisco in telling our stories for generations to come. This is the culmination of what I would call Chapter 2 in the story of the Names Project. It is the realization of a long-held plan to secure new institutional partners in order to secure the legacy of this AIDS Memorial Quilt and ensure that it will be here to teach for generations to come. This second chapter began 18 years ago with a move to Atlanta, Georgia. Congressman Lewis, we are honored to have spent 18 years in your district. Your leadership in the cause of human rights and social justice, your service to our city and to our nation is unparalleled. You are a hero to us all, and you are a reminder of what's possible. You're a reminder of what good trouble looks like, and you challenge us. Thank you. You challenge us every day to participate, to act in the face of injustice. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm proud to live in the 5th District. Just thought I'd share that. Before we turn to our next chapter, I would love to thank some of the people who over this last 18 years have made this transition possible. The first one's Brian Holman. Brian, you transformed our display program. You took it from 50 displays a year to a peak of 450. You made sure that the quilt was on hand wherever and whenever it was needed. You restored and you grew our relationships across this nation. And because of you, and because of course, our warehouse team and other staff members, today there are over 200 displays that are about to take place for World AIDS Day in cities, in towns, in small places, in libraries, in all sorts of institutions. And the truth is that when those panels return, their return address, John, by the way, they're coming to your house. Okay? And we're thrilled about that. Thank you, Brian. Jada Harris and Ada Rentis, thank you for spending hours and hours and hours in church basements, in HBCU student centers, in community centers and clinics, building the Do Lord Remember Me and Call My Name workshop programs. Your work fulfills a promise that we made in 2001, a promise to be intentional in our efforts to create a safe, loving space and give power to those in need, to give a voice to the AIDS crisis that was finding its epicenter in the African American and Latinx communities. You helped establish an authentic response, created specifically for people of color. And like every single story found on this quilt, these newest stories have opened hearts and opened minds in profound ways. Board member and colleague Billy Planer, thank you for making Names Project an important stop on your organization's civil rights journeys. More than 30,000 middle and high school students, rabbis, Jewish educators, and others spent time in our midst in Atlanta, learning about the epidemic and the contemporary social justice issues that continue to fuel this epidemic. I'm grateful for the time spent with each and every one of these people in a conversation that speaks to, there is no other, only another. Gert McMullen, you remain for so many. You are the woman whose soul is stitched into the very fabric of this handmade treasure. Thank you for never leaving the quilt's side. And Roddy Williams, where are you, Roddy? You have been the glue that has helped me make and keep the doors open. Your years of service to donors and display hosts, the staff, the board, the volunteers, and your devotion to the quilt is the very definition of servant leadership. Words will never convey my gratitude. Harriet Sanford, Amy Stone, and Tracy Newton. As board chairs, you challenged me, and you reminded me of my mother's words. You challenged me to focus on not whether we could get through the difficult times, but how we would get through them. Thank you for helping me stay the course. I'd also like to thank our founders, Cleve Jones, Mike Smith, and Gert McMullen. You wrote chapter 1 in our history. You armed us with a beautiful idea, and you allowed us to find a way to express our pain, our anger, and our love in 3-foot by 6-foot pieces of cloth. And then you fought to bring the quilt here to our nation's capital. And you made AIDS real and immediate for us all. And now it's time. I'll show you. And now it's time to pass the torch. I remember my first call is about 6 years ago, I think, to Betsy Peterson and Nicole Saylor at the Library of Congress. Betsy is the director of the American Folklife Center, and Nikki, is the head of the archive. I was calling them for advice. I wanted to know about how we could begin to frame the dialogue around who would be the next home for these collections, and how would they be managed, and how would they be organized. And Betsy chimed in and she said, well, that's what we do. I'm telling you, I had this moment where I might have squealed and cried at the same time, because I thought, this is it. In a time when we were originally not welcome in our nation's capital, where many of the people who are in this room today fought to have us represented here, isn't it lovely that we are coming full circle and we are being invited into our nation's library and into our nation's capital with vigor, as it were. Thank you. Finally, absolutely none of this could have happened or would have happened without the National AIDS Memorial stepping up. You stepped up, you stepped in, and you made a commitment to care for the Names Project, to care for the Quilt, and to care for it in perpetuity. Because of you, the Names Project's taking a giant leap forward. And I know it's ironic that we're going back to San Francisco in our leap forward, but I think it's more than appropriate for the Quilt to reside in the home that gave birth to it and in the city that gave life to the AIDS movement. The Names Project and the National AIDS Memorial, we share a rich history. It is linked through time, geography, and mission. We share a vision for the future, and that vision includes the National AIDS Memorial leading an effort to create a center that is dedicated to telling the story of life in the age of AIDS for generations to come. I am now proud to introduce the man who will lead this effort. He is indeed one of the finest humans I have ever encountered. I've had the privilege now to work with John for clearly close to a year, and I am proud to call him colleague and honored to call him friend. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Executive Director of the National AIDS Memorial, Mr. John Cunningham.
Age. I would like to open my remarks today by remembering Jack Porter, who left the Grove family last Friday evening. Jack was a testament to the true goodness of humanity. Jack was the partner of Stephen Marcus, who was the visionary of the AIDS Memorial Grove and who died of AIDS prior to the breaking of ground. For 30 years, Jack could be found in the memorial, sweeping in the circle of friends, sharing stories with those who visit the memorial from around the world. Jack always ensured that we stayed true to our mission of healing, hope, and remembrance. I visited Jack 2 weeks ago while he was in a skilled nursing facility, and he was so pleased about what is taking place today. May we all remember the memory of Jack Porter, a life well lived, and may we strive to live as well as he did. My name is John Cunningham, and I'm the Executive Director of the National AIDS Memorial, and I am a man living with AIDS. I would like to invite anyone here in the room with us today who is living with HIV or AIDS to stand and be acknowledged. Julie, thank you for your kind words. I would like to thank our dignitaries that are here with us today, Speaker Pelosi, Congressman Lewis, Congresswoman Lee, Dr. Hayden. Thank you all for your leadership, for your steadfast commitment, and for your unwavering support for those in need and fighting against AIDS. I would like to express my deep and sincere appreciation to Julie and her dedicated team from the Names Project. Brian, Roddy, Gert, Tracy, thank you. Over the last 9 months, I have had the opportunity to develop a partnership with you, Julie. And today, that partnership helped make this a reality. I would also like to thank the Board of Directors of the National AIDS Memorial, as well as my amazing team, consisting of Steve Sagasser, Matt Kennedy, Kevin Herglotz, P. Tyrone Smith, Keena Gata, and Deb Dennison. Without your dedication and commitment to our cause and our effort, nothing would have come to be today as it has. I also want to thank my dear and loving husband, Joel, for his support, because this job can take a lot of time, and I couldn't do it without you. To Cleve Jones and Mike Smith, thank you for your vision of the quilt and for helping to establish the first AIDS memorial. Gert McMullen, what can I say? You've been with the quilt since the very beginning, and you moved from it to Atlanta with your boys. And I am pleased to announce that Gert will be returning to the San Francisco Bay Area with her boys and our beloved quilt. I want to express my deep and sincere appreciation to our long-standing partners at Gilead Sciences, who stepped up when asked to help to not only return the quilt to the San Francisco Bay Area, but also to help to secure its future. With us today is former Director of AIDS Policy for the White House under President Obama and the current Executive Director of Community Engagement for Gilead Sciences, Douglas Brooks. I also want to express my deep and sincere gratitude to Cora Bzuka, Vice President of Public Affairs for Gilead, who has had faith in our ability to accomplish this monumental task. We gather in this majestic hall, which has seen so much history. Today, we mark another historic event, not only in the story of AIDS, but also in the story of social justice. For the story of AIDS is a story of social justice, or perhaps a story of injustice. We are here in the Library of Congress as the American Folk Life Center will ensure the vast collection of archives which tells the story of not just those lives memorialized on the quilt, but also the broader story of AIDS will be available for the public. This collection will now be accessible to the public through this, the world's largest library. We are so pleased that this partnership will tell the story in perpetuity. 30 years ago, just a short distance from where the early panels of the quilt were arriving from around the nation and were being sewn together, a small group of San Franciscans gathered in a neglected, forgotten, and abandoned dell within Golden Gate Park. As with those who were sewing together the panels, these individuals were devastated by the magnitude of loss, but together found solace. They sought to create a space in nature where a community could gather to heal and find hope for a brighter future. Today, this space is our nation's only federally designated memorial to AIDS. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for your steadfast support and vision of making this happen through the National AIDS Memorial Act of 1996. Thank you. Today, the National AIDS Memorial is squarely positioned and prepared to accept the awesome responsibility of stewardship of the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And as we write this next chapter, we are prepared to work together with the Library of Congress, the founders and leaders of the Names Project Foundation, and all of you to ensure the next chapter is vibrant and tells the story. I see it as two siblings, reared in the early days, together, instilled with the same values and priorities, who went their own ways, embarking upon similar work. And today they are reunited together to ensure all lives lost are never forgotten and that the story will forever be told. The Quilt's new home will reside in California District 13, Congresswoman Barbara Lee's district. The National AIDS Memorial is committed to building upon the rich history and to honor its programs and its traditions. We will continue to work together to ensure our shared mission and values will be the foundation from which the future is built. As our nation's only federally designated memorial to AIDS, we are the keeper of our nation's story. For a memorial is about memory, and memory is about never forgetting. Both the Quilt and the National AIDS Memorial have, since their founding, been truth tellers. As we look to the future, we must tell the entire story and never forget that in the early years of the epidemic, it was a dark story. One of hate, prejudice, neglect, discrimination, rooted in ignorance and otherism. This dark period empowered and emboldened a community to act, generating love, compassion, action, care, and hope. This is our story. As the National AIDS Memorial looks to the horizon, we envision a National Center for Social Conscience, and the Quilt will play a central role in telling the story, and in so doing, it will inspire the next generation of leaders for social change, justice, and human rights. I would like to leave you with a quote from film historian and AIDS activist Vita Russo. "Someday, the AIDS crisis will be over. Remember that. And when that day comes, when that day has come and gone, there will be people alive on this earth, gay people, straight people, men and women, black and white, who will hear the story that once there was a terrible disease in this country and all over the world, and that a brave group of people stood up, fought, and in some cases gave their lives so that other people might live free in the future." Thank you. It is now my distinct honor to introduce Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Congresswoman Lee has stood shoulder to shoulder in the fight against AIDS with all of us. She is the founder and co-chair of the HIV/AIDS Caucus. Please help welcome my Congresswoman, Barbara Lee.
Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. And let me just say, what an inspirational and resounding performance by the Gay Men's Chorus. Just thank you, thank you, thank you. We need this here on. And also, let me just recognize the founders of the Quilt, Cleve Jones, Mike Smith, Gert McMullen, and honored Tina Crosby and the Feldman family, and all of the family and friends who have lost loved ones. And I wanted also to our phenomenal Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden. I just want to thank you so much for your leadership and for really hosting us this morning for this really beautiful ceremony. And of course, to Julia and to John, thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for really making sure that this beautiful event is put together and really highlighting the memories of those we lost, but also where we need to go as we move forward. Thank you so much, and thank all of you. Let me take a moment to recognize our speaker, Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Lewis, for their tireless and extraordinary efforts and work to end the epidemic. Also, was it 23 years ago, Speaker Pelosi, when President Clinton actually signed your legislation designating the AIDS Memorial, 23 years ago, the AIDS Memorial or the Grove, and elevating this place really not only of grieving, but of healing, elevating this to a national level. And of course, she continues to be extraordinary and steadfast in her leadership to end AIDS and has never lost sight from day one of this very noble effort. And so, yes, I'm proud to stand here with you today as co-chair of the Congressional HIV/AIDS Caucus and a proud representative of California's 13th Congressional District. We stand here in remembrance of the lives of the people who died from AIDS so that they will never be forgotten. Their stories will be known by future generations, thanks to you. Also, today's historic announcement honors the more than 30 years of stewardship of the Quilt by the Names Project and celebrates the awareness, and it really has helped raise the awareness of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. I know the presence of the archives at the Library of Congress here and the permanent home for the Quilt will forever honor the history and make the story of life in the height of the AIDS epidemic accessible for generations to come. And so yes, not only is the Quilt coming home to the Bay Area, but also the International AIDS Society 2020 conference is returning to Oakland and to San Francisco. Yes, thank you. And I could not be more pleased and prouder for the Quilt to come to my district in the city of San Leandro. And I hope that at the conference, attendees from all over the world will be able to visit the Quilt and the National AIDS Memorial. Since the Quilt first started raising awareness over 30 years, we have made tremendous progress in our work to achieve an AIDS-free generation. Thanks to programs like the Ryan White Program, the Minority AIDS Initiative, PEPFAR, the Global Fund, thanks to Speaker Pelosi, we have saved over tens of millions of lives and helped millions of children be born HIV-free. Almost every day now, there are new scientific breakthroughs in treatment and prevention of HIV and AIDS. But we still have much work to do. My district in Alameda County, the 57 jurisdictions among Alameda County is one, still disproportionately are impacted by the HIV epidemic. Here in the United States, 14% of the 1.1 million positive Americans are unaware of their status. And as we know, vulnerable communities, Black, Latinx, and LGBTQI communities are disproportionately impacted. We've made great strides thanks to you over the past 4 decades, but still have a lot of work to do to end stigma and discrimination. So make no mistake, this is still a crisis, and we will fight to end the epidemic. Many of my friends' lives were taken away much too young and too soon by AIDS. My first year as a member of Congress in 1998, I worked with my colleagues in Alameda County to declare a state of emergency in my district regarding the epidemic. So the National AIDS Memorial and Quilt, you made such a tremendous impact in telling the story of the AIDS crisis, and we will never forget the lives that were lost and what you have done. We owe it to everyone whose name is on it to keep fighting until the number of new HIV/AIDS cases drops to 0. 0. So thank you all for your incredible work and activism. This truly is one of the most important issues facing our nation and our planet. And I am proud to stand alongside you until we have a world free of HIV and AIDS. Thank you again, and God bless. Whoa. Let me take this moment of privilege and honor to introduce our great warrior for human and civil rights, our colleague, our friend, someone who has led on so many fronts so that there can be true equality and justice for all. Congressman John Lewis from the great state of Georgia.
Thank you. Barbara Lee, I thought you were my friend. You just forgetting about a poor child. You're a good-looking group. You're beautiful, handsome, and smart. You're never giving up. You're never giving in. You have kept the faith. You have kept your eyes on the prize. Now is not the time to give up, but to stand up, to speak up, and speak out, and get in the way, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Over the course of his life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. often spoke of the beloved community, a society at peace with itself and its neighbors that recognize the dignity and the worth of every human being. From the earliest days of the AIDS crisis, there was very similar communities. This community provided for each other what society denied them: brotherhood, sisterhood, human decency, and unconditional love. Unconditional love. In the height of the Civil Rights Movement, we spoke of love. Love your brother. Love your sister. Love your mother, your father. Love your friends. We can see love in each other. This quilt is a family home for the countless men and women who lost their lives, and to those who love and remember them. So let us keep it for all time and never give up on any soul, for we all are human, and we must respect the dignity and the worth of all human. On one occasion, Dr. King said to some of us, just love everybody. Love those who fail to love you, just love. Just love a little hell out of everybody. You know, Judy, thank you. You're an Atlanta girl. Thank you. Thank you for being you. It is my honor to be with you, to be here in this beautiful, wonderful place. I remember when I was growing up, I was denied a library card simply because of the color of my skin. But now I could come to this beautiful, wonderful place and be inspired. And when people come and visit the Quilt, they will be inspired not to give up, not to give in, but to learn, to stand up, to speak up and speak out. And so I said from time to time, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something. Do something. You cannot afford to be quiet. I'm going on for a while. But my responsibility is to present a friend, an unbelievable, committed, dedicated woman who is so human, who is so smart, and who works so hard. She is my friend. She is my sister. And I want to thank the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, for being here and for all of her work. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, John Lewis, for being here, being there for all of us over and over again. And may I say that as John pays tribute to the Names Project and the Quilt, and extending hospitality to the Quilt in Atlanta for all of this time, let me say that what you know, but I will reinforce that John Lewis was there when we introduced the Equality Act last year. It was a bill to open up the Civil Rights Act to include LGBTQ community in ending discrimination in the vote. John is very proprietary about the Civil Rights Act, very careful about how we amend it. We don't, except with John's blessing, standing right there, we made that announcement, the Equality Act. Thank you, John Lewis, for this, for your kind words, for being you, and for being here. Thank you, John Lewis. He's a master of words, but he always acts upon those words and his beliefs as he expresses them. What an honor for all of us that he was here. When I was looking forward to this day, I knew it was going to be an emotional day. I didn't realize, though, John, that we would have lost Jack Porter just a few days before this momentous occasion. He was a dear, dear friend. I love him dearly. He made me think I was his best friend. Did he make you think that, too? He had a way about him. I don't think I'll ever have a birthday, a holiday of any kind, or anything that I've done that I would not hear from him or see him. For 30 years, we've been going, for a long time, going to the Grove, and he was always, always there. He was just remarkable, and we'll miss him terribly. So that made it more emotional, and then to be introduced by John Lewis, oh my, too much. In any event, Julie Rhoad, thank you. Thank your mother. Thank you for your leadership of the Names Project. John Cunningham, getting ready to, Barbara, I know it's in San Leandro, but getting ready to welcome it in a few years back to San Francisco. But the Bay Area feels very, very welcoming to the Quilt coming home. Cleve Jones, I'm going to talk about in a moment, but Cleve and Mike Smith and Gert, thank you for being so masterful and making all of this happen over time. Dr. Hayden spoke so beautifully about having the Library of Congress receive not the quilt, but all of the memorabilia associated with it. And in doing so, it raises the profile of it, the opportunity for others to see it, the visibility of it. But in return, all of this information about the Names Project brings luster to the Library of Congress as well. This is a beautiful gift to our nation. Beautiful gift to our nation. The Gay Men's Chorus, I love numbers, I love to count, votes and other things, days, whatever. Thank you so much for making this such a joyous occasion, springing from our grief, but giving us hope. Thank you so much. You made it lovely for all of us. Here we are. Let me just tell you this. First, this is in some ways self-deprecating, in other ways self-serving. So I'll put up those one. So a long time ago, 1987, Cleve Jones comes to my home and tells me in advance what it's going to be about, but he comes there and we want to take some pictures to announce a new project, the Names Project. Now, I am a mother of 5 children, and I'm just newly elected a member of Congress. And I say to Cleve, a quilt? Nobody sews. Is that not right, Cleve? I said, I have 5 children. I went to school in a convent from the earliest days. I know how to sew, I know how to darn, I know how to knit, I know how to crochet, I know how to tape, I know it all. I don't sew. I have a sewing machine, I don't sew. So if I don't sew, as a mother of 5 with a sewing machine and all of that knowledge, nobody sews. That was my wisdom at the time. I guess as a mother of 5, you don't have time to sew, but nonetheless. So I say, Cleve, I just don't know about this project. Can we do something else? Like, I don't know what. And he said, no, this is it. We're sticking with this. And of course, look at this. So a couple years later, Cleve says, we want to bring the quilt, now it's almost 2,000 panels, to Washington, D.C. Now I'm in Washington, and it wasn't that long later, a matter of months it seems to me. So he comes to me and he says, we want to display it on the mall. We're getting some resistance. So I said, well, that can't be, right? So I go to see the National Park Service. They said, oh, yeah, we can give you a corner, a little space on a corner someplace. I said, you're not hearing this correctly. That's not the ask. We have a big ask. So, and I, earlier than maybe I should have, spoke for all of the Democrats in Congress to say that this was our request. No was not a possibility. How are we going to get from here to there? One thing and another, much resistance. As I said, this is self-promoting, so they said, well, we can't do it because you're going to kill the grass. So well, we can handle that. We're not going to kill the grass. So the way we can handle this is you're going to have to get the quilt lifted up every 20 minutes. This quilt has to be lifted up every 20 minutes. And I said, well, you understand, we have volunteers from all over the country. That's the easiest thing in the world. We will lift up the quilt every 20 minutes. And you can check on us after. So I said, but you don't understand, we have all these volunteers because people in America are sewing their hearts out. They're just sewing. Everybody loves to sew. This is to the heart of who we are. Sewing flags, throwing quilts, and the rest of that. Don't you understand what sewing means to us? So anyway, with the promise that we would lift the quilt every 20 minutes, you remember all of this, Cleve. Cleve is my hero. I every time I see him, I think what a miracle he is, and Mike and Gert. So I have mine, Susie Paraki Rocio, Flower Girl in my wedding. So many others, but every quilt a story, every quilt, every panel from the heart. It was so beautiful. So that Friday night, after that week of the quilt being there, who is the newsmaker of the week? Cleve Jones. And they had helicopters all over the mall showing. It was a triumph. Thanks to you. Thanks to Mike. Thanks to Gert. Thanks to Gert. Might not have been every 20 minutes. And it might not have been every panel. But whatever. They can come see me if they have a problem with it now. In any event, it is this beautiful manifestation of love. This beautiful manifestation of love. So Barbara Lee is welcoming this to San Leandro. Barbara Lee has, from day one, she came to Congress, she had an amendment on the floor, successfully on the floor, right the first day, it seems to me. Then she got on a plane, went to Durban, South Africa, to be part of the AIDS conference. She has been relentless, persistent, smart, and I was honored to be with her when we announced, or I don't know if that was an announcement, but a tribute to the conference coming to the Bay Area, the AIDS conference coming to the Bay Area. This is a very resilient virus. It keeps mutating. Every time we think we have it in its grasp, it does something different. So we have to be resilient in the fight as well. But our spirit about it, our love, our memory of it all. So when we're doing the AIDS Memorial Grove, Jack Porter, so many, his partner Steve Marcus, this was again a labor of love. When we were doing that, I had some resistance from my friends, colleagues in Congress saying, we shouldn't be just having a memorial to one disease, AIDS Memorial Grove. I said, well, we are. No, No, you have to hear the rest of it. We shouldn't be having it, but if we have it, it should be in my city, their city. They didn't want it, except if we had it, it was going to be in their city. But we thought we were proprietary about it. And so when John talks about his leadership there, and he's been such a tremendous leader, thank you, John, he doesn't talk about, well, it's grand design, renewal, nature, community, all the rest. But a lot of time we spend weeding. All right? We spend weeding and planting and all the rest to make it so beautiful. And now they will have a physical structure to house some of the history of it all. And then eventually the names project. So this is something really spectacular in this fight all these years. And later we'll be reading names of some other folks whom we have lost. But in the meantime, we will continue our efforts to find a cure and achieve an AIDS-free generation. Again, I thank all of you. I do want to say, when everyone stood up to who's living with HIV and AIDS, he didn't stand up because he was already standing, but Dan Bernal, my district representative in San Francisco, is included in that. So this is very personal with all of us. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, John. Thank you, Clive. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ert. Thank you all. And again, this Library of Congress is a better place for what is going to be coming. It's a fabulous place. Carla Hayden is wonderful. She came from Baltimore, not too far. So I take special pride in her and praise her for the wisdom of enhancing this magnificent historic collection already present in the Library of Congress, greatly enhanced by the Names Project memorabilia. Thank you all for what you have done. Thank you.
If I may briefly, thank you, Speaker Pelosi. Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. May today, you being, Nancy, with your family, with your people, may it re-energize you, may it empower you as you return to the den.
Yay. Is it appropriate to say ditto? I'm not sure. As we begin to wrap up our program today, we'd like to blend a couple of our traditions that are rooted in very same era. And that is the notion of when I pray for you, I will call your name. Today, we have a tradition that when we read names at the Quilt, the first reader is always our founder, Cleve Jones. And shortly you will hear from Glenn Rainey, who will lead us in, well, who will sing, Call My Name. And then we will begin a reading of names with our dignitaries. Thank you all for being here.
As Julie said, Glenn will sing Call My Name. Then Cleve will come up and he will introduce the sister of Marvin Feldman for a few words. Right.
Call my name, picture me there like a photograph. 'cause wherever you're standing, I'm standing there too. Imagine me, and I'm right next to you when you call my name. Think of me, please, for another day. Every time you remember, it summons me back. Wherever, whenever you do. Just a single day at a carnival. Was it 2 years ago, last May? And then we got stuck on the Ferris wheel. What I'd give to relive that day. I embrace every moment, I hope you do too. Call my name, hold me again in your memory. Just remember the weekends, the dancing till dawn, the first morning star we made wishes on. Just call my name. Don't let my memory fade away. All the mornings together, the nights at home. Remember and don't be alone. Remember, you're never alone.
Hi, I'm Cleve Jones, and I have a couple things I'd like to say. First of all, we killed every blade of grass on that mall. Oh no. So thank you so much. She's known to the world now as Speaker Pelosi. Where we live, we call her Nancy. And she's been there from the beginning for us. She hosted the first fundraiser in her home and convinced the Park Service we were going to fluff the quilt. For the last 13 years, I've been continuing the struggle for access to health care. I work for Unite Here International Union, which is the hospitality workers union, and we fight for the dignity and rights of working people, especially immigrant women who work in the hotels that you stay in. And I'm proud to be a part of that struggle, and I want to acknowledge Tim Barnes, our political director, who is here today. I also want to introduce you to somebody you're going to be hearing more about, Mike Gifford, who runs the AIDS Resource Center of Wisconsin, where people with HIV, like myself, live longer than anywhere else in this country. They're expanding their services, and I'm looking forward to seeing a partnership between them and the National AIDS Memorial to send the message of the quilt, because one of the single greatest obstacles to our fight against AIDS remains stigma. And we have to continue to address that, the stigma of homophobia and racism that have combined together in such a horrible way. I'm deeply grateful to all of you who are here today from the chorus, Dr. Hayden and your staff here, Representative Lee, Representative Lewis, amazing heroes. But I want to tell you about my friend Marvin Feldman and how this quilt began. This quilt came to being on November 27th, 1985, at our annual tribute in San Francisco to Harvey Milk and George Moscone, who were so important to all of us in the Bay Area. They were murdered on November 27th, 1978, and every year we reenact the candlelight march that occurred that night. However, in 1985, the news had just come out that we in the Bay Area, particularly in Oakland and San Francisco, had already lost 1,000 of our friends and neighbors to this new disease. I was overwhelmed by that statistic, and so many of those people were my closest friends and neighbors. It seemed to me like everybody I knew was going to die. And so that night at the annual tribute, I had Harvey Milk's old bullhorn, and we had some stacks of cardboard and magic markers, and we asked everybody to write the names of one person they knew who had been lost to this disease. At first, people were reluctant, and then finally they began to print those names, and we marched in silence with our candles down Market Street to City Hall. We filled Civic Center Plaza, and then I had everybody walk a couple blocks to the old Federal Building, and we'd hidden some shrubbery some ladders in the shrubbery outside, and we climbed up with big rolls of tape on our wrists, and we covered that gray stone facade with the names of our dead. And as I looked at that, I thought to myself, it looks like some kind of strange quilt. And I thought of my grandma back in Bee Ridge, Indiana, and the quilts that she had sewn. One of them is on my bed tonight. And it was such a powerful symbol and such a warm, comforting, middle American, traditional family values sort of symbol. And I said, yes, that's the symbol. And for a year I talked about it, and everybody said it was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard of. And then I met Mike Smith, who had a degree in business from Stanford, and he knew how to make this happen. And we had our first volunteer meeting. We put up posters everywhere. Only 2 people showed up, Jack Castor and Gert McMullen. And we lost Jack a long time ago, but Gert is still sewing. So Gert, Mike, I love you both. Thank you. I could not be happier and more grateful for this outcome. There is no scenario I can imagine other than this never having to have happened that would bring me a greater sense of peace to know that this extraordinary work of art is going to be preserved, and thanks to Dr. Hayden and her colleagues, is going to be available. There's enormous lessons to be learned from this pandemic. It's important that we not allow those lessons to be lost in time. They will be relevant, unfortunately, again in the future. But it might be good to look back also to 30 years ago to what happened when a bipartisan Congress passed the Ryan White CARE Act, which brought millions and millions of dollars into those communities that were hardest hit by the pandemic. This summer, we've got the International AIDS Conference coming to Oakland and San Francisco. We've got the Democratic and Republican conventions. We've got an election season. It's a good time to remind people of the important legislation that can happen that will do good for people who need it the most. That was introduced by Senator Ted Kennedy, and it was signed by President George H.W. Bush. So we can get things together and we can save lives. I think I'm just about done, but I do want to express my gratitude to everyone in Atlanta who has kept this quilt, and I am so happy and grateful to bring it home. And now I need to tell you that my best friend, Marvin Feldman, has many panels in the quilt because he had many friends who were artistic. I made the first one in his honor, and I will say that there are several quilts for him. All of them are beautiful except for one. and Marvin would, I think, hate it because he would want something that could be in the front window of Barney's or the Museum of Modern Art, and I didn't do that. I can't sew, but I believe that Marvin's mother, Esther Feldman, is watching this live stream in Florida. Esther, I love you. I promised you I would keep Marvin's name alive, and I'm so grateful that your family is here with you. Please welcome Marvin Feldman's sister, Tina Crosby, and her family.
My being here, I guess, is an accident of birth, but I'm very, very proud to say that I am, that my youngest brother, Marvin Feldman, the man whose death compelled Cleve Jones to make the first panel of the AIDS Memorial Quilt in 1987. I loved my brother very much. Marvin was funny, fun-loving, creative, and clever. He had a biting wit and loved dark humor. He was a joy to be around, and people were drawn to him. Marvin wanted to be famous, which is partly why he became an actor. But he never found fame through his craft. It's ironic he became famous because his dear friend Cleve chose to memorialize him by creating the quilt after Marvin died at age 33. Quilts feel like home. They are warmth and comfort, handmade, unique, and full of stories. To me, this quilt holds love, anger, sadness, and loss. It is a perfect way to wrap up the people we have lost and to show that they will not be forgotten. Every color, every shape, every stitch that is part of this quilt is full of love and memories. On behalf of my still very sharp 97-year-old mother, Esther Feldman, who wanted to be here today, and I'm going to say hello, Mom, but couldn't, my younger brother, Bob, who also wanted to be here but deals with Parkinson's, my late father, Sidney, and the rest of my family, we say thank you to everyone who invested their time and love into this amazing legacy for those lost to this horrific disease. And finally, we can't convey how grateful we are to Cleve for envisioning this remarkable project sparked by love for Marvin, whom we all adored and we miss. Thank you.
Marvin Feldman, John Hall, Nick Paris, Scooby Bowman, Rick Claflin.
Susan Paraki Roggio, Scott Douglas and his partner Michael McCall, Neil David Kelsey, David Smith Fox, H.M. Sanchez, Bill Braley, Terry Sutton, John Johnston, Marvin Feldman. How many quilts? Yeah. Many. And then one more, Bill Krause. Bill Krause worked for the Burton family, which preceded me in Congress, and his panel was what was visited so much when the quilt was here. Bill Krause.
Jose Ramirez, David Thompson, Todd Coleman, Jonathan Halpern, Jerry Gendler, Scott Lago, Jack Castor, my friend Jeff Phillips, and my friend Peter Anson.
Roger Lyon, David Calgaro, Joey Van Es Ballesteros, Neil Lewis,
Curtis Robinson, Robert Wade Edwards, Jeffrey Nyland, Michael Dennis White, John Paul Warren, Ted, Ed Sully, Sergei Shuskil, Dwayne Schomburg, William L. Norris, Michael Matthews, Wade Landreth.
Dr. Robert Scott, James Ferguson, John Iverson, Roger Gale Lyon, Jack Castor, Scott Lego, Steve Abetta, and Neil Lewis.
Patrick A. Doyle, Robert M. Dunn, Grady Michael Evans, David M. Green, John R. James, Bruce Langdon, Patrick R. Mahoney, Jim Mannon, David S. Meisler, Kenneth M. Mooney, Patrick Kuntz Ragland, Steve Johnson, Thomas Blakesley, Ron Clements, David.
Orrin Riley, Larry Lois Lane Casper, Harvey Wang, Michael Hatmaker, and Tom Wright.
Jim, John Brown, Glenn Klein, Ron Lindsay, and my friends, Martin Walsh, William Roerig, Greg Mariner, Ron Dodge, and Adam Muzzy.
My first husband, Tony Levesque, Grove visionary Stephen Marcus, Stephen Kukan, Sergio Anguiano, Guy Lowe, Ryan White. As is the tradition at the National AIDS Memorial at the conclusion of every workday, I would now ask anyone here that has a name in their heart that has not been spoken to now speak aloud that name, and at the conclusion feel free to lay your rose upon the quilt and then join us for the reception. Please speak aloud the names.
Russo.
As we conclude, we would like to invite you to visit the archive collection that is on display that the Library of Congress pulled together for this special ceremony, as well as light refreshments down the hall. Thank you again for all of you being here.
Thank you.